Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's set the scene. You're a risk manager, right?
Yeah.
Deep in the banking world. And ESG, environmental, social, governance, it's everywhere. Every meeting, every strategy doc. The pressure's mounting, not just to get it, but to report on your bank's actions. And maybe even more vital, to figure out if the banks you deal with are actually doing what they say. But here's the tricky part. How do you compare them when their ESG reports feel like they're written in completely different languages? So today we're diving headfirst into that exact problem. How banks are reporting ESG, why there's so much variation, even among the big players, and crucially, what it means for you, our mission here. To give you a clearer, more actionable view of these ESG disclosures, we want to spotlight the hurdles for regulatory compliance and, really importantly, help you assess and maybe sidestep those misreporting risks. By the end, you should have a sharper lens for looking at these reports.
And guiding us is some really fascinating research. Our main source today is a study called Do Banks Speak the Same ESG Language? A text-based clustering approach. It takes a data-driven look, specifically at non-financial disclosures from 14 major Italian banks. And it uses some pretty advanced text analysis to figure out how consistent, or maybe more accurately, inconsistent, these reports really are. It's the kind of analysis we need to cut through the noise.
Okay, let's unpack this then. ESG disclosure, it feels like it's just exploded, hasn't it? It's fast become the main way banks signal, hey, we're committed to sustainable development, how they show they're contributing. But the study, right off the bat, points to a big issue, one I know you'll recognize. There's still loads of uncertainty about how these ESG activities should actually be documented, how they should be reported. Yeah, and what's really critical here, the key takeaway, is that this uncertainty, it's not just some small headache. It fundamentally cripples your ability to make good comparisons. Temporal comparisons tracking progress over time, or spatial comparisons looking at one bank versus another. It gets incredibly difficult because there isn't one single agreed upon consistent way to rate their ESG disclosure reliably. And from your perspective as a risk manager, that's a massive hurdle when you're trying to evaluate different banks or even just benchmark your own firm's progress. It's a moving target.
Right. And you'd think, well, regulators are stepping in. Surely that helps. Like the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, EFRAV, they've got those 12 general standards, the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. They try to cover a lot of ESG ground. So if these standards are out there, did the study find they're actually, making things clearer on the ground? Are they helping? Well, unfortunately, the findings are pretty stark on that. Even with these standards, which are definitely well-intentioned, the study states quite clearly that a high degree of arbitrariness in reporting ESG standards emerges. It suggests that while they're a step forward, they're not really the silver bullet yet for getting true consistency. Banks still seem to have quite a bit of leeway in how they interpret and apply them. And that leads right back to the variations we're talking about.
Okay, so it's not just about external standards failing to fully harmonize things. What about the banks themselves, the internal pressures? I imagine they're just swamped with ESG data requests.
Oh, absolutely. The burden is significant. They're dealing with, as the study puts it, multiple voluntary disclosure requests that tend to overlap. And this isn't just annoying, it really complicates the whole process of drafting these reports. It drives up costs too, this study mentions, significantly increasing the drafting costs. So for you, understanding this internal pressure helps explain why some reports might seem less thorough, or maybe why they focus more on just ticking the compliance boxes. It's a resource issue too.
Okay, here's where it gets really, really interesting for your job as a risk manager. Picture this. The same bank report gets judged completely differently by different reputable rating agencies. We're talking big names, Standard Ethics, MSCI, ESG Research, Sustainable Fitch, S&P Global, Morningstar Sustainalytics. It sounds like ESG ratings are kind of the Wild West. Why is that happening? And how did this study even try to make sense of that chaos?
Exactly. The Wild West isn't far off. The core reason is simple, really.
Okay.
These agencies all use dissimilar metrics, different scorecards for the same game, basically. So direct comparisons, almost impossible. And what does this fundamental lack of consistency mean for you from a risk standpoint? Huge challenges in evaluating ESG disclosure properly. It can actually make banks less willing to really go for it on ESG because it's not clear what good looks like, which then, ironically, reduces the benefits. For risk, this hits strategic and reputational risk directly, and your ability to assess counterparty ESG risk seriously undermined. If you can't compare reports reliably, how can you gauge the real underlying exposure? It's a major blind spot.
So, given that problem, that sort of Tower of Babel you described, how did the study actually get a grip on it? To get past assumptions and see what's really happening, they must have used a clever approach.
Yeah, this is where the smarts come in. The study looked at something called narrative convergence. They took the non-financial reports from those 14 big Italian banks, and their main tool was the cosine similarity method.
Okay, cosine similarity. Sounds technical. What's the gist?
Think of it like this. It measures how similar the meaning and language are between documents. It calculates the angle between text vectors. Crucially, it doesn't get thrown off by document length, which is vital here because these reports varied massively. The average was 333 pages, but the range was huge, 152 pages up to 705.
Wow, okay, so it looks past just the word count to the actual substance.
Precisely. And to keep things manageable and focused, they looked mainly at the first 40 pages of each report.
Which makes sense. Research often shows the key messages, the stuff banks really want you to see, are usually front-loaded in these big reports. Smart shortcut. So after getting those similarity scores, the sort of semantic fingerprints, they used hierarchical clustering. This basically groups the banks together based on how similar their fingerprints were. It identifies these homogeneous reporting clusters. Now, for you, the listener, why does this matter? These methods help cut through the noise. They show you where there's real convergence versus divergence. They can even spot template-like reporting, which might look good but actually lacks substance. And importantly, they highlight outliers or maybe even best practice examples you could use for benchmarking. It's about finding patterns in the apparent chaos.
And the results. You said fascinating. So they didn't find just one ESG language, not even two, but 4 distinct clusters. 4 ways banks tell their ESG story. What did they find? Exactly. This is where it gets really practical. Let's walk through these 4 languages or clusters. First up, cluster 1, the standardized or cohesive group. This included banks like Fineco, Mediobanca, BPM, Mediolanum, Illimity, and Unicredit. These guys showed really high narrative similarity. Their reports just sounded alike in how they discussed ESG. This points to genuinely standardized disclosures. Maybe they used shared frameworks, maybe they had good consultant support, who knows. But the reports had a strong emphasis on quantification, accountability, and alignment with stakeholders' expectations. What's also interesting, these banks often call their reports sustainability reports or integrated reports, not just non-financial disclosure. Suggests they see it as more than just ticking a legal box, right?
Yeah.
Especially with things like CSRD coming in. But here's the absolute key insight for you as a risk manager. The study found these banks, the ones with this high narrative consistency, also exhibit a lower risk of greenwashing.
Wow, okay. Lower greenwashing risk linked directly to how they write the report. That's huge.
It really is. It gives you a tangible signal. If a report feels cohesive, standardized, quantified, the chances of it being misleading seem lower, according to this analysis. It's a vital clue for mitigating misreporting risk.
That is a massive takeaway. So if you see a report from one of those banks, maybe you can feel a bit more confident. But does that mean the other groups automatically have higher risk? Or is it more complex? What about the second group?
Good question. It's definitely more nuanced than just good versus bad. Let's look at cluster 2, the transitional or hybrid group. This had MPS, Desio Bank, Generali Bank, and Intesa. The study describes them as shifting towards structured ESG reporting, but still rely on older CSR-style language and framing. So they're kind of mid-journey, in an evolution phase, you could say, trying to balance the new regulations with how they've always communicated.
Okay, so maybe not higher greenwashing risk necessarily, but perhaps more inconsistency, less maturity in their reporting approach.
That seems right. It likely means more due diligence needed from your end to really understand where they stand. It's a work in progress.
All right, so we have the leaders, the standardized ones, then the ones transitioning. What about banks taking a more bare bones approach, just the facts? Did the study find that too?
It did. That's cluster 3, the instrumental or minimalistic group. This was BPER and Credum. Their reports emphasized factual accuracy, tabular data, and regulatory compliance, with limited narrative embellishment. This suggests a real focus on just meeting the requirements. Compliance first, maybe due to resources, maybe strategic choice.
So for a risk manager, less story, maybe less context, but perhaps the raw data is clear if you dig into the tables.
Potentially, yes. The risk here might be less about outright misrepresentation and more about a lack of the bigger picture or forward-looking insights, which could still make assessing strategic ESG risk difficult. It's efficiency over elaborate storytelling.
And then there was a cluster of just one bank. That seems unusual.
It does. Cluster 4, the idiosyncratic or unique group, just iFace Bank. Its report just stood out. It deviated notably in structure, tone, and lexical content from the other banks. It used its own unique rhetorical logic. The study speculated this might reflect its market niche, maybe being primarily an online bank influenced its style.
So for you, the listener, encountering a bank like this means you can't easily pigeonhole it.
Exactly. You'd need a much more specific deep dive into that particular bank. You can't rely on comparing it easily to the others using standard benchmarks.
What's also really telling, and maybe a bit reassuring for you trying to make sense of it all, is what didn't seem to matter for which cluster a bank fell into. It wasn't the report length, was it, or the bank's size, or even whether it was mainly online versus having branches everywhere.
Correct. None of those seem to be the deciding factor. It really came down to the narrative choices, the semantic content, the meaning baked into the language, not just superficial stuff.
Which really underlines the need to read these things carefully, not just judge by the cover or the page count.
And connecting this all back to the bigger picture for you, the risk manager. The core message is pretty clear. Despite all the calls for harmonization, despite new standards coming online, there's still this persistent diversity in how banks actually talk about ESG in their reports. And that directly impacts your ability to compare them, to assess risk effectively. This ongoing heterogeneity, it hinders spatial and temporal comparisons and the assignment of a single rating by external agencies. That's the core problem for benchmarking, for evaluating partners or competitors, or just tracking progress for compliance.
So it's not just about the difficulty of getting a consistent view. That inconsistency itself creates tangible risk, especially around misreporting or greenwashing.
Precisely. And this study draws that empirical link very clearly. Remember Cluster 1, the standardized group. Higher narrative consistency was linked to lower greenwashing risk. That gives you, the risk manager, something concrete to look for. If the language feels standardized, follows frameworks, seems consistent, the risk of it being misleading appears lower. That's a valuable clue in your risk assessment toolkit. It's a data-backed proxy for credibility. This whole situation also sends a strong signal to regulators, doesn't it? And maybe to the industry itself. The study explicitly flags the need to introduce detailed standards for the banking industry to encourage banks to properly report their ESG performances.
So current rules like ESRS, while helpful, aren't quite hitting the mark yet and reducing this variation.
Apparently not enough, according to this research. It's a call for regulators to get more specific, more granular, especially for banking, covering specific topics, specific ways of reporting exposures. And it also suggests that maybe investors, customers, the market, need to keep the pressure on banks to genuinely embrace ESG. That pressure can drive better, more consistent reporting, which helps everyone, especially risk managers, needing clarity.
Which definitely raises a key question for you, our listener, as you navigate all this. Given this diversity, this lack of a single ESG language, how might you need to adjust your own risk assessment frameworks? You clearly need to account for these varying levels of transparency and detail. It's not a static field, so your approach probably can't be either.
Yeah, summing it up, our deep dive today really shows that ESG reporting in banking is, well, all over the map, despite efforts to standardize. This variation creates real headaches for transparency, for comparability, and definitely elevates the risk of misreporting or greenwashing without clearer bank-specific standards.
So as you head back to your desk, looking at those hefty ESG reports, whether they're 150 pages or pushing 700, think about this. How can you use this understanding and this idea of the 4 different languages of ESG reporting to push for more clarity? Either within your own bank or perhaps more immediately when you're sizing up counterparties, because the language they choose to speak in those reports and how consistently they speak it, it seems to matter a whole lot more for your risk profile than perhaps we realized.